Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We're learning Mishnah Shabbos, Perek Yud, chapter 10. We're up to Mishnah Hey, Mishnah 5. I'd like to dedicate this morning's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shalamis Rabinowitz, Shalamis Mas Yaakov Eliezer. Our learning should be a schus for her neshama.
Amen.
Okay, Mishnah Hey. Hamaitzi kikar l'rishus harabim chayev. One who transfers a loaf of bread into a public domain, meaning from a private domain to a public domain, is chayev, is liable for desecrating Shabbos through the act of haitzah. Now, there's nothing novel to this idea, but it's leading into the next case. Haitziu shnayim. Let's say two people carried it out. It's only a loaf of bread, but at the end of the day, two people picked it up together. They picked it, lifted it up in the house together. They carried it outside together. They put it down together. They did the entire malacha together. The malacha is paturin. They are exempt. They're exempt. Let's say it's a kind of a thing. We're not going to loaf of bread anymore, but something that each one alone would not have been able to have taken it out, and both of them took it out together. Chayavim, then they are liable for desecrating Shabbos.
Because they have.
One second. Now, let Reb Shimon Paiter, Reb Shimon exempts. So what we have here is the following. We have learned before that, let's say, if one person were to do the taking out of the private domain, and someone else were to finish doing the rest and putting it down in the public domain, they would not be chayiv. You have to do, because each one literally did only half of the act of haitzah. Now, in this case, let's say the first case where two of them took it out, they both did it, finished. They both did all of it. Nonetheless, the halacha is that they are exempt. This is based on a pasuk from the Torah that if two people do a malacha together, they are going to be exempt. Even though, no, one second. Just make sure I'm not confusing something here. Okay. Basically, they both did it together. And in order to be liable for desecrating Shabbos, you have to be considered doing the entire act yourself, not with somebody else also doing it at the same time. Now, it's not clear to me if this is something that we need a pasuk for. Is this considered unusual? Meaning it's the reason why two people carrying a loaf of bread together, let's say, is pater because aren't liable from the point of a Torah desecration of Shabbos because of the fact that it's unusual to do. It's not clear to me which one it is. But in the case of where they both, could have done it themselves, they did it together, we say they're exempt. It's either, again, I'm not clear. I'm not sure if it's based on a pasuk or it's considered unusual. But okay. Now, but in the case where each one couldn't have done it by himself, right? So then, number one, is it unusual then that two people are carrying it? Absolutely not. Definitely not. The only question is there a way to look at it that each one did the whole thing in a way that, it's different than before, right? In before, each one could do it by himself. We're saying it's exempt, all right? And the way I understand it is that when two people are carrying a loaf of bread, basically they did it together, but each one could have done it on its own. And theoretically, we can look at it as each one's doing it on his own. Mm-hmm. But either we don't look at it that way for some reason because they shared it in some way, or because of the fact that it's unusual to do. In this case, where each one on his own couldn't have done it, clearly there's a question of I can't do it on my own. I need you to do it. So I did. So that should be considered like I did half, right? Shouldn't be considered like I did the whole thing. But what we say in that situation is the following. Being that I carried my half, let's call it, and you couldn't carry your half unless I was helping you out. So it's considered like we both did it. Mm-hmm. And it's not unusual either to do it that way. And therefore, we say they're both chayiv. That means each one of them has their own carbon chatas to bring. That's when each one basically couldn't have done it by himself, right? But when two people are doing something that each one could have done on their own, then already, in the very least, we say that's considered a shinui, it's considered unusual, and therefore they wouldn't be liable. Reb Shimon Paiter, Reb Shimon's exempts. Reb Shimon says, in the case, even where each one on their own couldn't carry it, he says that nonetheless, we say that they're putter, even though it's not unusual, they're putter. Because practically, let's put it this way, practically speaking, did each one do a whole act? Not really. No. We're only consider it like the other one, like each one did a full act, because you could have done your part without me. Mm-hmm. So that's already that's the kind of thing that Reb Shimon says he disagrees, and he says, no, that's not called they both did a whole act, they're putter. And, again, there seems to be some kind of a pasuk that is teaching us that two people who do an act together are going to be exempt. And Reb Shimon is going to extend that even over here to where each one couldn't have done it on his own. Okay, now, Hamaitzi Achlin Pachas Mikashir Bekli, a new halacha. You transfer food less than the prescribed amount, meaning we had previously that for food, the minimum amount for transgressing the malach of Haitzah, the minimum amount for food was
nice.
The volume of a
fig.
A dried fig, a gregaris, right? A gregaris. Gregaris. That's the minimum amount. Now, in this case, you have less than that. But you have it in a vessel. And the vessel is, big enough. Pater af alakli. You're going to be exempt even for carrying out the kli. Why? Shakli tfeilalai. Because the kli is secondary to the food. If I was just trying to transfer a vessel on its own, I'd be liable. But over here, it's not about the vessel. The vessel is just the container for the food. It's the food what it's all about. So therefore, the container is seen as secondary to the food. If the food doesn't have the prescribed amount, then you're not going to be liable, even though you carried it out with the kli. Now, next case.
If your intention is to carry out the vessel,
then you'd be. Excuse me?
Your intention is, I want this vessel. I want to carry out the vessel. So, okay, I'll put a fig in it.
I'm not going to help you. Because then it's not secondary. I'm not doing then I'm transferring the kli on its own merit.
Putting the fig in it doesn't help.
No, it's not magic.
But we're saying here
it's about where where the whole point of the kli is, because you want it to be a container for the food.
Yeah.
And why am I transferring it? Because I want to transfer the food. Now, as achai b'mita, let's say another case. There's a living person in a bed, okay, and you carried him out in the bed. Pater af alamita, you're going to be exempt even though you carried out the bed. Shamita tfeilaloi, because again, the bed is secondary to the living person. Mm-hmm. Now the question is, how come you're not liable for carrying out the living person?
Maybe he's smaller than a fig.
No, that's not the answer.
That's not the answer.
There's a better answer than that. There's a better answer than that. And the answer is a principle called Chai Noisei Es Atzmai. Yeah. A living person carries himself. Now we're going to explain that in a second. Mm-hmm. So in a situation where, now if he'd be tied up, this living person, you tied him up in the bed and he can't move, or he's sleeping, then we would say, no, then we don't say Chai Noisei Es Atzmai. And if you look at the next part of the Mishnah, Es HaMeis B'mita, let's say it's a dead person in the bed, Chayiv, then you're liable, because there's no more. It's not because you're liable for transferring the dead person. Now, what is this klal? What is this principle of Chai Noisei Es Atzmai? A living creature carries itself, which actually only applies to people, and that is, it means that when a person is being carried, he naturally shifts his weight around to get a degree of balance. Thus, he carries himself to some extent and lightens the load on the one who is carrying him. The carrier, therefore, is not liable because he is being assisted in a significant way by the person being carried. Basically, you can't look at the act of carrying as a full act of carrying because the carrier is being assisted by the living person who tries to give itself a balance. Animals don't seem to do that. Animals just like submit themselves and that's it. But when it comes to a person, the person is we consider that aiding the carrier. and therefore the carrier is not going to be liable. But if, let's say, the living person is tied up and he can't move around, then he's not assisting, and you would be liable for carrying him. Now, the Mishnah continues. So we just said, but if it's a dead person in the bed, then you'd be liable. Let's say you're carrying out you're carrying out, right? You're carrying out the volume of it's not a full dead body, but it's a kazayas. It's the volume of an olive of a dead person, of dead flesh, or dead person, let's call it that way. Ukazayas menanavela, or again, the volume of an olive of a dead animal, an animal that died without slaughtering. Or the volume of a lentil, if you're talking about a piece of a dead sheretz. Sheretz is, there are 8 shretzim, 8 creeping animals that the Torah says that if they die, their carcasses will be matame, make something tameh. In all these cases, if you transfer any of these amounts, you're going to be liable, because these amounts are significant in the sense that they can actually transmit tumah. And now when you take them out and you take them away, there's a significant amount and a significant purpose in what you're doing. Reb Shimon Peter. Reb Shimon says in these cases, including the case of the full dead body in the bed, you are patur, you're exempt. Now, this comes into a very important principle in the laws of Shabbos. There's a principle called melacha she'eina tzricha legufa, which means they translate that here as a melacha that is not needed for its defined purpose. And tzricha is not needed legufa, for itself. What do I mean for itself? For its defined purpose. Now, what does defined purpose mean? So defined purpose means that any melacha that we do is meant for a constructive purpose, meaning for transferring, right? When I want to go ahead and I want to transfer a vessel from one place to the other, what do I want to do? I want to get the vessel to the next place. That's what I want to do. That's called the constructive purpose, right? I'm trying to do something positive. I'm trying to accomplish, to move this object from here so that it should be there. In the case of removing a dead person from your house, says Reb Shimon, why are you removing him? Now, we could probably maybe, even argue about this a little bit, but in the very least, let's make it specific. And that is, you're taking the dead body out of the house because you don't want him to remain in the house, because if the dead body remains in the house, anybody who walks in is going to become tameh. So you want him out of the house. You're not looking to transfer him to the other place. The other place may not matter. Right now, you just want him out of the house, which means that it's not that you're transferring him because you want to get him to another place. It's not because you want to, so to speak, accomplish something positive. You're trying to avoid something. You're trying to avoid him from being in the house so that he doesn't so that people who walk into the house won't become tameh. That's called the malacha she'eina tzricha legufa. If the reason I'm doing a malacha on Shabbos is not because I'm doing it for what we could call a constructive or positive purpose, but it's a negative, I'm trying to get it away from something, not because I want it, I just want it away from something, that is a malacha she'eina tzricha legufa. Another example of that would be when we have a malacha of trapping an animal. So when you trap an animal, why? Because you want the animal. What if you're trapping the animal because you want the animal to stop eating up your vegetables in your garden? You don't want the animal. You just want to get the animal away from somewhere. So you're trying to avoid its presence, trying to avoid the damage that you're doing. That'll be another example of malacha she'eina tzricha legufa. Now, Reb Shimon is saying, you know why you're patur in all these cases with the dead body or the dead nevela or the dead sheretz? Because I'm trying to get it away from where it is, so that it shouldn't make me or anybody else tameh. That's malacha she'eina tzricha legufa. Therefore, Reb Shimon says you're patur. But the Tanna Kama didn't say that. The Tanna Kama says you're chayiv. Because according to the Tanna Kama, it doesn't matter malacha she'eina tzricha legufa. Basically, if it has a significant purpose, then the halacha is that you're going to be chayiv. Although it's not, so to speak, a constructive purpose, or what's called its defined purpose, which is to accomplish something positive, nonetheless, Tanna Kama still says you're chayiv because it's a significant amount, has a significant purpose, and therefore you will be liable. And just want to conclude that this principle of Melachas Tzricha Legufa, yesterday we had we spoke about a concept called Melachas Masheves, right, which we call that calculated labor, where if you did something, if the whole act was unintentionally, you were exempt because it's not Melachas Masheves. If you hold Melachas Tzricha Legufa is pater on Shabbos, is exempt on Shabbos, that's also considered lacking in Melachas Masheves. There, the point of Melachas Masheves of calculated would then be called, as they call it here, purposeful. Right? It has to be purposeful, purposeful labor.
Right.
And purposeful means, what does purposeful mean? Does it mean purposeful in the sense of doing something positive, or does purposeful just mean there's a significant purpose involved? And that would be the machlokes here in the Tanna Kama and Reb Shimon. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
What's your question?